After 11 years of marriage, I thought I had built a life of trust and love with my wife, until I discovered the devastating truth that unraveled everything. I recently had an emotional conversation with my wife, Laura. We've been married for 11 years, and though we've shared so many good times, this talk left her in tears. It brought back memories of a difficult moment 3 years ago when I almost lost my job. Back then, Laura was so upset at the thought of me missing our anniversary that she insisted I come home no matter what. Fast forward to now, and it's Laura who won't be around for this year's anniversary. I didn't argue or try to change her mind. Even so, the past 12 years of my life with her have been my happiest. I still remember the first time I met Laura. She was 24 years old, just starting out in sales. She came to my architectural firm to pitch an advertising deal, hoping to convince us to place ads in high-end magazines. At the time, our firm simply couldn't afford such a luxury, but in a room full of people, I couldn't take my eyes off her. She had this confident, striking presence and rich auburn hair that seemed to catch the light just right. Later that day, I talked about her with my business partner, and he encouraged me to approach her. He even gave me the little push I needed to grab her attention. So, I mustered up the courage and managed to hold her interest just long enough to ask her out. On our first date, Laura admitted that she had known all along our firm wasn't financially ready for the advertising packages she was selling. She had taken the meeting anyway. Even knowing that, I found myself falling head over heels for her. Over the next 6 months, our connection grew stronger, and eventually, she moved in with me. It was a big adjustment for her, leaving behind her fast-paced, on-the-go lifestyle for something more stable. Just a few months later, we got married. Even now, I look at her and wonder how I got so lucky. Persuading her to say yes still feels like the best decision I've ever made. I couldn't help but think about all of this as I picked up the phone to call my boss, Rick. I've been with our company since the very beginning, back when Rick first started it. We were a scrappy little team of 4 designers, working long hours and finding innovative ways to cut production time. The phone rang a few times before Rick finally answered. "Luke, I'm swamped right now." "What's up?" he said, sounding rushed. I kept my tone steady. "Rick, I'm leaving for the day, and I won't be back until Monday." He paused, probably surprised. "Leaving? What's going on?" "I'm taking time to celebrate my anniversary with Laura," I replied, the words coming out with certainty. "See you Monday." "Have a great trip, and don't forget to knock before entering," quipped my boss, Rick, with his usual playful tone. I couldn't help but chuckle. "You always know how to get a laugh out of me," I said. Rick shot back with a grin, "Yeah, I get that a lot. Though, maybe not from the people who know me best." Feeling the need to share, I added, "Sorry if I've been distracted lately. Ever since they brought that new guy to run Laura's department, there's been a lot of tension at home. Hopefully, this trip will give us the break we need to reset." Rick nodded thoughtfully, even over the phone. "Well, it can't hurt, right? Just do me one favor, while you're out seeking adventure, don't forget about me." "Deal," I replied with a grin. "See you Monday." I didn't hang up immediately. Instead, I spoke with Rick's secretary, Rosa, about arranging a last-minute plane ticket. She had a knack for solving these kinds of issues, and I knew she could make it work. "Give me a few minutes, Luke. I'll call you back," Rosa said confidently. After our call, I rushed home to pack. I had barely started when the phone rang again. "You've got 45 minutes to get through security," Rosa informed me briskly. "The ticket's waiting at the counter in your name. Your return flight is booked for Sunday at 1:30 p.m. I couldn't secure a room in Laura's hotel, but there's one 2 blocks away. Safe travels." Her efficiency never failed to amaze me. I grabbed my shaving kit, threw it into the suitcase, and gave the room a quick scan to make sure I hadn't forgotten anything. I even turned off the coffee maker, something I rarely remembered to do. Then, I was out the door. In 15 years of living here, I'd perfected the art of finding shortcuts to get to the airport faster. Driving with purpose, I made it to my flight in good time. Our relationship had been strained for months, and Laura had become increasingly distant. She barely let me in anymore, and the shift started when she told me about her new boss, Paul Reynolds. He was a colleague from another department who had recently been promoted to take over her own. Laura couldn't hide her frustration. She worked tirelessly, determined to prove that the decision was a mistake. For the first couple of weeks, she came home completely drained, constantly talking about ways to outshine Paul. But as time passed, her determination seemed to shift into something quieter. She stopped discussing work with me altogether, and the gap between us grew wider. When I arrived at the hotel Rosa had booked, I checked in and quickly freshened up. After a long day of traveling, I was eager to make the most of my evening. A colleague had mentioned a charming, dimly lit restaurant nearby, exactly the kind of place I had in mind. Showered and ready, I stepped out, hoping this night could spark something to bring us closer again. I wanted to catch Laura before she left for dinner. Glancing at the clock in the hotel lobby, I noticed it was nearly 5:30. The streets outside were alive with activity, and after a moment's hesitation, I decided to walk to the hotel Rosa had mentioned. The receptionist's directions were easy to follow, and I arrived quickly, feeling a mix of anticipation and nerves at the prospect of seeing her. Inside, the concierge greeted me warmly. "How may I assist you?" "I'm looking for Laura Spencer," I said, trying to keep my tone casual. She nodded and quickly checked her notes. "Yes, she's a guest here. Let me call her room and see if she's available." She dialed, the phone ringing softly in the background. After a moment, she turned back to me with a polite but apologetic smile. "I'm sorry, sir. There's no answer. Would you like to leave a message?" Disappointment flickered through me. "No, thank you," I replied, trying to mask the heaviness in my voice. I was hoping to surprise her. "Tomorrow's our anniversary." Her expression softened. "Well, happy anniversary in advance. If there's anything else I can help with, let me know." I thanked her and stepped away from the desk. My heart sank as I considered my next move. Laura might have already left, and the odds of finding her felt slim. As I walked through the lobby, I noticed a restroom near the back wall. I decided to stop and gather my thoughts, hoping that maybe, somehow, I'd still run into her. After freshening up, I returned to the bustling corridor and scanned the room with renewed determination. People came and went, their faces unfamiliar. Finding her here felt like searching for a needle in a haystack. But just as I was about to give up, I caught a faint sound of laughter that froze me in place. It was her voice. Turning toward the source, I saw her sitting at a nearby table. Laura looked radiant, dressed in an elegant navy blue dress I recognized from evenings we used to spend dancing together. She wasn't alone. Across from her sat a man, his posture relaxed and his gaze fixed entirely on her. Their conversation appeared effortless, their smiles genuine, and their closeness unmistakable. My chest tightened as I tried to process the scene. It didn't look like an ordinary dinner between colleagues. Something about the way she leaned in toward him felt intimate, far beyond professional familiarity. Then, it happened. He leaned closer, and she didn't pull away. Instead, she tilted her head slightly, meeting him halfway. Their lips met in a tender, deliberate kiss that left no room for misinterpretation. The room seemed to blur around me. My hand instinctively gripped the doorframe for support as I tried to steady myself. It wasn't just the kiss, it was the way Laura looked at him afterward, her eyes filled with an adoration I hadn't seen in years. That look used to be mine. My breath caught in my throat. For a moment, I was completely paralyzed, unable to move or think. I headed for the exit, my expression undoubtedly betraying the mix of anger and heartbreak I felt. My chest burned with determination as I stepped onto the sidewalk. My eyes stayed fixed on them. Laura held onto his arm, leaning into him with a familiarity that twisted the knife in my chest. They walked together, their movements casual, like they didn't have a care in the world. After they disappeared into a nearby building, I followed, hesitating only briefly before pushing the door open. The entrance was unattended, so I kept close to the wall, making my way inside as inconspicuously as possible. I paused for a moment, letting my eyes adjust to the dim light, and scanned the room. There they were, sitting at a small table for two tucked away near the far end. My stomach turned, but I forced myself to keep moving, walking along the edges of the room until I found a small table a short distance from theirs. I sat down, gripping the edge of the table as though it might keep me grounded. A waitress approached almost immediately. "What can I get you, dear?" she asked in a warm, casual tone. "Double scotch." "On the rocks," I replied, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. She gave me a surprised look but didn't comment. Maybe it was the way I ordered, or the fact that I was sitting alone with an air of defeat. Either way, she disappeared quickly, leaving me to my thoughts. At their table, Laura and her companion raised their glasses in a toast. I couldn't hear their words, but their smiles and easy laughter said it all. My stomach churned as I watched the man lean closer, his voice low and intimate. I leaned back, waiting for my drink to arrive, and muttered to myself, a guy should always carry a camera for moments like this. Finally, I caught Laura's attention. Her face froze as her eyes met mine, and her lips moved soundlessly, like she was trying to form words but couldn't quite manage it. The man beside her turned to follow her gaze, his expression shifting to mild annoyance as he spotted me. "Wow," I said, my tone dripping with sarcasm. 2 months. What a milestone. I still remember my anniversary, 11 years in. It starts to lose its novelty, though. I gestured lazily toward their glasses. "Let's toast to 2 months, shall we? Passion and prosperity, right? A beautiful couple like you deserves it." Neither of them responded. Laura's face was a mix of shock and shame, while the man's expression turned guarded. I stood up, throwing a few bills on the table without waiting for my drink. "Enjoy the rest of your evening," I said flatly before turning and walking out of the club. I walked briskly back to the hotel, my thoughts racing. It seemed unlikely that Laura would know my current address, and after what had just transpired with her and her companion, it felt even less likely that she'd try to follow me. I was determined to put as much distance between us as possible, and fast. Once inside the lobby, I hurried to the front desk. "Excuse me," I said, my tone polite but urgent. "Do you happen to have the contact numbers for any airlines? I need to book a ticket as soon as possible." The receptionist nodded. "Of course, sir. May I ask if you have a preferred carrier?" Before I could answer, the phone on her desk rang. She gestured for me to wait while she quickly handled the call. Moments later, she hung up and turned back to me, her expression now more focused. "Sir, if you leave now, you might be able to catch the last flight of the evening. Check-in closes in 30 minutes. Otherwise, the next available flight won't be for another 3 hours," she explained. "Thank you," I replied quickly, already calculating how fast I could hail a cab and make it to the airport. I signed the cash receipt handed to me by another staff member, apologizing as I did so. "I'm sorry I have to cut my visit short. I'll consider staying with you again next time." Without waiting for a response, I rushed toward the exit, my suitcase in tow. Later, as I reflected on the events of that night, I realized there had been no need to panic. I still had a few minutes to spare by the time I passed through security. Settling into a seat near the boarding gate, I waited for the announcement. The atmosphere around me was busy enough to distract my restless thoughts. Unlike my last flight, I didn't need music to occupy my mind. The flurry of activity in the terminal was enough to keep me grounded. A sudden memory brought an unexpected smile to my face, one that I quickly stifled. I remembered Laura's mother, Deborah, and how she'd never really liked me. While she held her husband, Greg, under her thumb with an iron grip, she often treated him poorly. I thought about the way she had eyed me with that same cool disdain during family gatherings, always finding ways to belittle me when Laura wasn't looking. That train of thought led me to recall a specific photograph from a family event long ago. In the picture, I was standing beside Laura, smiling for the camera. But what had stuck with me was the way she had been looking at him. Even back then, the way her eyes softened when she looked at Greg had sparked a flicker of doubt. Unlike most men, who are often accused of having selective memories, I've always prided myself on remembering everything. Laura, like many women, enjoyed testing this by asking things like, "Do you remember when we talked about this?" or, "Do you remember the first time I told you that?" What she didn't expect was that I remembered all of it. Every word, every plan, every whispered secret exchanged in the dark. Sitting there in the terminal now, I couldn't help but feel the weight of those memories pressing against my chest. The life we'd built together was unraveling before my eyes, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. I headed straight to my car, barely aware of my surroundings as I joined the exit queue. The drive home was a blur, and by the time I pulled into the driveway, I realized I couldn't recall much of the journey. How long it had taken or the roads I'd driven on felt irrelevant now. All that mattered was that I was back. Stepping into the dimly lit house, a strange, unfamiliar feeling washed over me. It was as though this place, my refuge for so many years, had suddenly become foreign. I couldn't shake the thought that this might be the new normal, that I'd have to get used to this emptiness. I dropped my bag near the door and made my way to the kitchen, flipping on the answering machine as I passed. Its soft mechanical hum broke the silence, but there were no new messages. For a moment, I stood still, letting the silence envelop me. But I knew I couldn't stand idle. Laura's belongings filled the house, cluttering every corner with memories that felt more like accusations. I couldn't bear it any longer. Heading to the closet, I grabbed a few of the suitcases she'd collected over the years. I chose a large black one and a smaller bag for her clothes. I set them down in the hallway, then carried the rest to the bedroom. I opened her closet and began sorting through her clothes, carefully picking out items I thought she'd need. With a mechanical efficiency, I folded each piece and packed them into the suitcase. I repeated this process until her closet was nearly empty, then moved to her dresser. It had been ages since I'd opened that drawer. Seeing her neatly folded undergarments felt strange, like I was intruding on someone else's life. For a fleeting moment, an absurd thought crossed my mind, grabbing some hot dogs from the fridge, as if indulging in a mundane task might somehow ground me. But I quickly dismissed it and focused on the task at hand. Once I'd packed everything, I carried the suitcases and boxes to the garage, one by one. I didn't want Greg, my father-in-law, to have to deal with this later, especially since I knew Deborah, my mother-in-law, wouldn't help him. As I carried the last box, it slipped from my hands and hit the floor with a loud thud. "Hi, Luke," a voice called out behind me. I turned to see Deborah standing in the doorway, her face pale and filled with confusion. "What's all this? What's going on?" I let out a sigh, struggling to find the right words. I figured Laura might need her things when she comes back. At first, I thought she'd come get them herself, but I couldn't wait any longer. They were just cluttering the front room. Deborah's brow furrowed as her confusion turned to concern. "What do you mean, when Laura comes back?" she asked, her voice trembling. "She's been cheating on me," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady, though it cracked under the weight of the truth. "I saw them together. The last time, they were at a nightclub near their hotel, celebrating their 2-month anniversary." Her face went white as I continued. "I begged her to come home for our anniversary, but she said she couldn't. So I flew out to see her, hoping to surprise her. When I arrived, I found them having dinner. It wasn't just dinner, though, it was romantic. Intimate." I hesitated, then pressed on. She was laughing, smiling, happy. She even said it was their 3rd month together. Deborah's lips trembled. Luke, no. Laura wouldn't do that to you. She loves you. But I'd seen it with my own eyes. The way she looked at him, the way their entire world seemed to revolve around each other, it was undeniable. Standing in that dimly lit house now, I felt the weight of it all crushing down on me. If I wanted to regain control of my life, I'd have to take action. I couldn't keep standing on the sidelines, watching everything I'd built unravel. I tried to stay inconspicuous, knowing that what I needed now more than anything was proof. My head was spinning as I sat there, clutching the drink in my hand. It had been 10 years since I'd last touched alcohol, a decision I made for Laura. Back then, she had voiced her concerns about my drinking, convinced it could jeopardize our marriage. I quit cold turkey, and as a symbol of my commitment, I gave her my wedding ring, saying, "This is more important than anything else." But now, as I took that first bitter sip, I couldn't help but feel like the gesture had been meaningless. For the past 2 months, I've been living alone. Laura has been with him ever since he joined her company. It's astonishing how much she's changed. This is the same woman who used to claim she couldn't even stand the idea of dishonesty, the woman who would look me in the eye and talk about integrity like it was her defining trait. And yet, for 3 months straight, she lied to me every single day without a flicker of guilt or shame. I shook my head, thinking about it. If she thought I'd let her waltz back into this house as if nothing had happened, she was more foolish than I'd realized. But that wasn't the issue anymore. It wasn't about her, it was about me. What was I willing to believe? What was I willing to endure? Personally, I'd made my choice. It was time to cut my losses. I spent hours in the garage that night, tinkering with tools and setting up an improvised workspace to distract myself. It felt like the only place I could be alone with my thoughts. I missed having someone to share the little things with, dinners out, quiet nights at a club, whispering secrets in the dark. But now I had a different image stuck in my mind, a woman who could deceive me so effortlessly, who could share my house, my food, and my life while being intimate with someone else. My thoughts were interrupted by the sound of the doorbell. Curiosity got the better of me, and I headed to the front door, opening it cautiously. Laura stood there. I instinctively took a step back, saying nothing. "You must have been in the garage," she remarked, stepping inside and closing the door behind her. "I knocked, but you didn't hear me." I said nothing, just watching as she glanced around the room. The silence between us was heavy, almost suffocating. She trailed off, hesitating as though she didn't know how to finish her sentence. I crossed my arms and stayed rooted in place. There was no one else around to distract me, nothing to soften the blow of the memories rushing back. "So, what is it, Laura? Are you really ready to walk away from 11 years of our life together?" She paused, looking at me with wide, uncertain eyes. "What do you mean? Did you even bother to ask me, Laura?" My voice trembled, anger and disbelief mingling in every word. Or was it just easier to make excuses? For you, this was just an affair, a mistake you could justify to yourself. Maybe you even convinced yourself it was my fault. So tell me, Laura, was it me? Was it something I did that pushed you into his arms? She lowered her head, unable to meet my gaze. Her voice was barely a whisper when she replied, "No. I don't blame you for this," Laura said, her voice wavering but steady enough to carry the weight of her words. "It just happened." I scoffed, unable to contain my disbelief. "It just happened." "Laura, an affair isn't something that just happens. Being with someone else for 2 months isn't an accident. It takes effort, planning, and above all, secrecy to keep it going. Don't insult me by calling it a mistake." There was a pause as she flinched slightly, the truth of my words hanging in the air. And then, before I could stop myself, the words burst out, "You don't love me. If this is how you treat someone you claim to love, then don't even bother pretending." Her head shot up, her indignation clear. "How can you say that? After everything we've been through, after 11 years together, you think I don't love you? Listen, Laura, I began, keeping my voice calm but firm. You're always the one asking questions, so let me ask you something for a change. You've always prided yourself on being introspective, haven't you? You claim to know yourself so well, how you'd react in any given situation. So, imagine this, what if you found out that I'd been in an intimate relationship with someone else for months? Her face froze, but I pressed on. What if every single day we spent together during those months meant nothing to me? What if it was all an act, a facade to make you believe we were fine, while my heart belonged to someone else? Imagine I'd spent my days wrapped up in her world, then come back to you every night, pretending like everything was normal. Could you, still believe I loved you after 11 years? She opened her mouth, but no words came. Let me tell you something, Laura, I continued, my voice steady. You need to show me some confidence here, some acknowledgement of what you've done. Because right now, it feels like you're trying to act as though none of this matters, as though the time we spent together, the life we built, is something you can brush off. And what's worse? You both came up with the idea of giving her a gift to thank her for introducing you to. So what's next, huh? Are you planning the bridal party already? Looks like you've already got your bridesmaid picked out. All that's left is to find his best man and pick a venue for the wedding banquet. I leaned back in my chair, my sarcasm barely concealing the hurt behind my words. Her expression darkened, but she didn't reply. So, it turns out you're just like me after all, I said, bitterness dripping from every word. Or should I expect a server to show up at my doorstep next, serving me divorce papers? She finally looked up at me. What do you mean? First and foremost, I said, leaning forward, I need to know where you're going to live. Don't worry about a process server waiting for you, I'm not going to stoop to that. But Laura, when I gave you that ring all those years ago, I did it because I believed in us. When you threw that trust away, it was like you gave me back the ring and said, I'm done. So now I'm just doing what you already decided. I can't keep investing my energy in something that clearly no longer matters to either of us, I said, keeping my voice steady despite the storm brewing inside me. I can't forget, and I certainly can't forgive. Based on everything, your past behavior and how you've acted recently, it's painfully obvious that I'm not a priority for you. So, Laura, it's time for me to leave. You've made your choice, and now I'm making mine. I paused, watching her face for a reaction, but it remained unreadable. I don't know what you thought was going to happen, I continued, but you've ruined everything. Now it's your turn to go stay at his place. Laura blinked, as though trying to gather her thoughts. What do you mean? Do you think he doesn't have anywhere to live? Oh, I'm sure he does, I said, shrugging. Problem solved. Her lips parted, as though she were about to say something, but then she hesitated. Something in her expression caught my attention, and a realization dawned on me. Wait a second, I said, narrowing my eyes. You don't think his wife will agree to this arrangement, do you? Her face froze, and I could see the wheels turning in her mind. Wait, how do you know he's married? She asked, her tone sharp. This isn't a joke, Laura, I said firmly. Do you really think I'm that naive? Why else would you be standing here, trying to justify yourself to me? Her mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. So, what's the deal? I pressed. Does he still live with her? Are you waiting for him to leave her before you make your next move? Or are you just here hoping I'll make excuses for our 11 years together, like those years didn't mean anything to you? I didn't wait for her to respond. Here's the truth, I said, my voice heavy with finality. Those years clearly didn't matter to you then, and they sure don't mean anything to me now. So I'll compensate for those 11 years with a set of legal documents as soon as they're ready. Her face turned pale as my words sank in. The offer on the house remains the same, I continued. If you don't want to leave, you're welcome to come back and take whatever you want. But it's clear you're ready to move on without hesitation. So divorce me and go." Laura let out a humorless laugh, likely an attempt to mask her discomfort. "You're trying to make me feel guilty, aren't you?" "No," I said flatly. "I'm just pointing out the reality of what you've done." She glanced at the ring on her finger, her expression shifting. "You know what? Maybe I'll sell this," she said with a forced edge to her voice. "I could use the extra money." I raised an eyebrow. "Sure, go ahead. But don't expect much for it. They'll weigh it and give you pennies. You might get $130 if you're lucky. You couldn't even buy a cheap gold ring for that, but hey, it's your ring. Do whatever you want with it." Turning toward the door, I added, "Just make sure you've gathered all your things. I'm not holding on to anything for you." A few moments later, she returned from upstairs, holding a floral zip-up bag filled with cosmetics. "You were thorough," she said, her smile forced. "You only missed a couple of things." I nodded, keeping my face neutral. "Maybe I'll call you when it's time to move out," she added, her voice carrying a hollow attempt at lightness. "Of course," I replied, my tone clipped, leaving no room for further conversation. "I'd be happy to help, as long as it doesn't require being too close," I said with a faint smile, rising to open the door for Laura. When she suggested going for a walk, I hesitated for a moment, her request catching me off guard. Then, an idea crossed my mind. Wouldn't it be better if, I trailed off, deciding it wasn't the right time to entertain those thoughts. Later that week, my primary goal was to finalize the last piece of business between us, obtaining Laura's signature on the divorce documents. I wanted to ensure she held no false hope of reconciliation. Pulling into the driveway of her parents' house, I paused for a moment, staring at the familiar facade. This place had once felt like an extension of home, but now it was just another stop on the way to closing this chapter of my life. It wasn't easy, but I reminded myself that peace and quiet nights would come again, eventually. Taking a deep breath, I stepped out of the car and made my way to the front door. The doorbell echoed inside, and moments later, Laura appeared. "You really think I'm just going to stand by and let this all play out as if the last few months never happened?" I said firmly, watching her expression shift. Laura left the room briefly, returning with a pen in hand. She moved quickly, signing her name on the appropriate pages without hesitation. I stood silently, observing her as she flipped through each sheet, her movements precise and almost robotic. When she finished, she pressed the pen down on the table with unnecessary force and shoved the documents into a manila envelope. "All done," she said, her voice sharp and devoid of emotion. She held the envelope out to me, her hand steady. "Take these and go. I hope you can find happiness." "Thank you," I replied simply, taking the envelope. "Take care of yourself, Laura." After the divorce was finalized, I heard from a mutual acquaintance that Laura had asked Paul to leave his wife and marry her. But Paul, unsurprisingly, refused. He made it clear that their relationship had no romantic foundation, admitting that he never had genuine feelings for her. The news left Laura reeling, or so I was told. Faced with the reality of her situation, she had to accept that she would have to move forward, without me and without Paul. From what I understand, Laura now lives with her parents as she works to rebuild her life. She's searching for a new job and, I imagine, learning a few hard lessons from our past.